Hello everyone, I am Bruffy1322 and this video is going to show the fastest fully upgraded vehicles from the GTA Online Tuners DLC in terms of lap time. As always, the position counter is in the top left with the best lap time of the vehicle achieved in the top right, and since there are cars from a number of classes here, the positions within their own classes are also listed in the top left. This video lists all vehicles added on day 1 of the Tuners DLC, for any drip feed cars added after that, other classes of cars because I've tested them all, and all the information you need about this series. Check the playlist linked in the second line of the description, and feel free to check out my Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want to support this work and get testing results of any new cars a little bit early. So we've already seen the first two. The Warrener was kind of meh, was very similar to the regular Warrener, and I actually got exactly the same lap time as the regular Warrener, which I couldn't believe until I put the footage side by side. And then we had the Futo GTX, which is basically just a quicker Futo. It does have the most powerful engine of any vehicle in this DLC, but that doesn't mean much if it doesn't have grip or braking ability or anything else, and it basically ends up being about 2 seconds quicker than the regular Futo. Now the ZR350 and the RT3000 are both very similar in 8th and 7th places for the DLC, languishing, below 50th place in sports. Not that great, to be honest. But then in 6th place we've got the Dominator GTT, and this becomes the new quickest muscle car in the game, at least for lap time. Even if it wasn't and it was just slightly slower, I'd be telling you to still use it because it's so much easier to drive than the other top muscle cars that we've seen. But that group of 4 muscle cars that we always used to have on the same pace is now a group of 1. We'll talk about this later on when we see a comparison between this and the previous best of the Yosemite. Now, Remus in 5th place, we're into the top 5 for the Tuners DLC, at least the first 10 cars. A 105.9, so only just scraped into the 105. It's down in 47th place in sports. I found this pretty boring to drive, to be honest. The same with the ZR350 and the RT3000. There's a lot of sports cars really that all feel very similar to how these cars drive. There's nothing really all that unique about them, but a 105 is a fairly respectable lap time. Now 4th place we've got the Tailgater S, and with a lap time of 1 minute 5.532 it means that we finally have something to compete with the Shafter V12s at the top of the sedans class, with it only being around a quarter of a second behind in 2nd place for the class. It's basically the polar opposite of a Shafter V12 and more like a standard GTA sedan experience where it's got bags of grip but lacking a bit of power. It is going to be entirely track dependent whether this or the Shafter V12 would be quicker, but I would say that on most balanced tracks the Shafter will still have the edge. It is also a little bit more difficult to extract the lap time out of the Tailgater, just because you need to maximise the traction in every corner and get on the power early. And it's just a shame that we still, we don't have the Komoda, the Revolta and other sedans that were shoved into the sports class instead, because sedan races would be amazing right now if we had those available too. But nevertheless, the Tailgater S is competitive at the very least at the top of the sedans class, and on some tracks it will be the quickest one to use. Now the Euros in 3rd place, we're into the top 3. It's kind of a bog standard mid-tier sports car, this one. It's a little bit pointy on the front end, giving it a tendency to oversteer under braking. It is quite smooth over some of the bumps as well, which is nice, and something that wasn't the case with the the ZR380 and the RT3000. They were pretty bad over bumps, but it's not too bad. Now in 2nd place we've got the Jester RR, and I would say this is easily my favourite car of the DLC so far, at least for the driving experience. It's just really smooth to drive, really nice around the corners. It has a slight tendency to understeer, but it's very easily manageable, and it's just a really nice car. Half a second quicker than the Euros, as we just saw. It's on the sort of same pace as other A-tier sports cars like the regular Jester and things like that, Massacro, all that kind of stuff, so that A-tier becomes even better now. And it's just a really nice, well-rounded car. But it doesn't quite have the pace to make it into number 1 spot, because that goes to the Calico GTF, and it's almost a second quicker with a 103.130. Now before I talk more about this car, I just want to preface all of this by saying that there's still 7 cars to come from the drip feed for this DLC, and we all know what Rockstar are like. Time and time again they've released a new fastest car for a given class, only to release something even quicker a few weeks later so that you have to spend money that you otherwise might have saved. And since the Calico is slightly slower than the Sultan Classic, in 12th place for the sports class overall, and we have the Sultan RS Classic coming, if you're on a budget you might want to wait until we've seen all the drip feed cars, which I showed in a previous video. I'll obviously be testing them all for lap time and top speed when they're released each week, but if you want to be competitive in street tuner class races right now, you need a Calico GTF. It is all-wheel drive and has decent power, which makes it very understeery, so you do need to be careful about that. It will wash out in the corners and you need to make sure that you've got your line right before you put the power on. But it does seem to have a very decent top speed, and when you drive it properly, it's just going to be the quickest around most tracks, pretty much every track. Obviously you're comparing it here side by side to the Jester RR, and actually they're relatively well balanced through most of the lap, and then it's sort of towards the end of the lap where the Calico is able to pull out the bit of a gap. So on some tracks the Jester RR is going to be possible to, you know, do well and at least be competitive, but the Calico is so good on acceleration and it has decent traction as well that it doesn't really need the top speed to be competitive. It just has that over and above on certain tracks that will allow it to pull out a bit of a gap. So you can use the Jester RR on some tracks if you want, and it might be competitive, but the Calico is always going to be competitive everywhere, and in most situations it's going to be the best. So yeah, interesting car to be honest, with it being so understeery and so powerful with the all-wheel drive, but again it doesn't make it into the top 10 of sports cars. So all in all, as a car overall, it's not that quick, you know, it's not even in the top 10 for the sports class, but for the tuners races, for the tuners subclass right now, the Calico is the best. Obviously, like I said, the top speed, we're not sure about what it is just yet because I haven't done the testing, but the top speed version of this video will be coming tomorrow, hopefully, and you can obviously see it with a link in the description if you're watching this after the fact, and that will give a full rundown of all of these cars for top speed as well. When it comes to the Dominator GTT, I just wanted to quickly mention that as you've been watching the comparison between it and the Yosemite, which is now the second quickest muscle car. Naturally there are going to be situations where the other top muscle cars like the Yosemite, the Clique, the Pisswasser Dominator are going to be better, since the Dominator GTT is only half a second ahead, and it remains to be seen what this will be able to do for top speed in the top speed testing video that I've already mentioned, and it remains to be seen what the Dominator ASP will be able to do when it releases. That's another car from the drip feed. But for now, the Dominator GTT is the new muscle class king, and the Dominator reigns supreme in the class once again. One final thing as we watch the comparison between the Tailgater and the Shafter V12 is that all cars here benefit from a relatively new advanced handling flag that makes suspension upgrades increase traction. It's actually what causes some of the lap time improvements on previous cars that benefit from the crazy camber, like the Asbo. You put the maximum suspension on, the wheels camber out, and you get much better lap times. That's not just from lowering the center of mass, it actually increases traction, kind of like adding an aftermarket spoiler increases traction as well. It doesn't have as big of a difference, it's not as big of an improvement as putting on an aftermarket spoiler for most cars, but if you want the maximum performance from all of these vehicles, you do need to have the lowest suspension on, because you will get a slight traction increase, and that's a relatively new thing that's only on a very small number of cars, but it just happens to be on all of these this time as well. One other thing is obviously talking about stancing and low grip tires. I'll talk a lot more about that in the top speed video, but also there will be a video coming out about that later on where I'll do some proper testing with those, but it's beyond the scope of this lap time testing video right now. So that's pretty much it for this one. I've worked so hard to try and get this video out today. Hopefully it's been helpful and hopefully you guys will find it useful. Please consider supporting on Patreon or become a YouTube member if you want testing results early, or just like the video, comment, interact, share it around. Anything that you do over and above just watching will help the video go better and help, you know, my work be even more worthwhile. But even if you just watch this and enjoy it and get some use out of it, that's good enough for me. Thank you guys as always for all of the support. And like I said, many videos still to come when it comes to the top speed testing, and then all of the vehicles still to come from this DLC and the drip feed. So make sure you subscribe, notifications on, all that kind of stuff. Thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you next time.